Welcome to the Cupertino Planning Commission of Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. I hope you will join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Fung, Commissioner Linskog,
Here.
Commissioner Scharf,
Here.
Vice Chair Kasolcharan,
Present.
Chair Rao,
Here.
all present except for Commissioner Fung.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. The next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. The 2025 June 24th minutes, if I may have a motion after we read. I believe there are some corrections. If staff
Chair, I believe Lindsay has an announcement to make about that.
Yes, I have a correction to the minutes for item 2. Vehicles that leave after parking for 72 hours must remain away for 72 hours. So that's in addition to the motion that we have.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk.
I move that we adopt the amended motion. The minutes. Amended minutes.
I can second. Vote.
The motion carries with Commissioner Fung absent.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is postponements. I don't believe we have any postponements. And moving on, the next item on the agenda is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the Commission on any matter within the jurisdiction of the Commission and not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. In most cases, state law will prohibit the Commission from making any decisions with respect to matter not on the agenda. Madam City Clerk, do we have any oral comments?
We have one comment in person and no comments on Zoom. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin. I am a member of Livable California, Catalyst for Local Control, and our Neighborhood Voices. These three groups have been studying SB 79 for probably the last 3 months. People are very, very concerned about SB 79. Every time it is rewritten, you have new definitions of bus systems that don't exist. The latest one is fast buses. No, I'm sorry, I love buses, but they're not fast. Okay. So every time Senator Wiener rewrites it, he constructs some sort of a new bus wording, which they don't exist. I mean, this is someone from the Wednesday night Zoom, our Neighborhood Voices, read the wording out of these bus constructions. They don't exist. So I don't know what Senator Wiener is trying to do. He obviously doesn't understand transit if he's inventing things like fast buses. I mean, wonderful. Hey, way to go. But anyway, people are horrified by what the governor did with the CEQA situation on July 2nd. I mean, I am personally insulted because my parents spent a great deal of time and money in the early 70s to promote and make people aware of the need for environmental awareness. They helped draft the CEQA documents. And I'm insulted that a governor who's supposed to be an environmental governor like Gavin Newsom would pull a stunt like this, because he is making CEQA seem bad, and it isn't. I'm even more energized to make sure that we protect our areas in the state. Did you realize, with this trailer bill drama that he's doing, that they have exempted environmental oversight on data centers? Now, if you were not aware, data centers are big business, and they are required for AI in California. I came out of tech. AI is very, very good. As my husband said, it's been around 40 years. But if you're trying to exempt these areas from CEQA, it's not a good look or fit. Hayward has an 11-acre data center that is going in. Charlotte, North Carolina has a 150-acre data center that has its own power source. This is where we're going. Santa Clara is burgeoning, so is South San Jose. We have to have CEQA oversight or people will
Thank
die.
you, Jennifer.
Thank
That
you.
is your time. We have 2 speakers on Zoom, David followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, David.
Good evening. I'm speaking on the safety element, and under California law, it requires cities to map.
David,
and-
this is oral comments. You may need to hold your comments on safety element till we come to the agenda item.
Okay.
Did you have comments on items not on the agenda for this portion of the oral comments?
No, I'll hold my comment until the right time.
Thank you.
We have 1 speaker on Zoom, Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Peggy.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners and staff. This is a general comment or reminder regarding Muni codes. When Cupertino has said over and over again that we run on the complaint system where our codes don't get enforced unless somebody complains. And so when you look at these Muni codes and making changes to them, I request that you try to keep them simple. For example, and I'm taking pickleball, which is a hot topic right now. If you decide that they're going to have quiet paddles, don't do 6 to 9 and then later, 5 to 9, whatever it is, because that's hard to enforce. By the time somebody comes out to look, the paddle's been changed or whatever. Make it simple all the time, whatever you decide. And follow that on all the Muni codes that you do if you can, to just make it enforceable. Many of our Muni codes are written so that they are so obtuse that they're hard to enforce even if somebody complains. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Thank you. So with that, we will move on to agenda item 2. This is a study session on a state law mandated update to the health and safety element. Application number GPA 2025-001, City of Cupertino. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rao and members of the Commission. Just wanted to get some orientation before I turn this over to our consultant who's going to really do the presentation on this. This is really the Commission or the city's first brush with the safety element update. And the reason this is being updated is because the housing element update has been completed as well, and this is required under state law. So that's really the driving force to why this is coming before you tonight. It is, again, a study session, and the goal is to take a very high-level view. As you can see from the packet, there was no attached draft document. That will be coming later. So tonight is really the goal to orient the commissioners and receive input on what you would see as the larger issues regarding the safety element update. In 2 nights, we'll be taking this to the Public Safety Commission. When we have a draft available, this will be coming back to you for your review and comment and your recommendation to the City Council. That should be happening later this year. Don't have a definite date at this time. So with that, our consultants are Jacqueline Protzman-Rohr and Tammy Seal. They're with PlaceWorks. And barring anything coming up on Zoom, I can turn the presentation over to them at this time.
Thank you.
I will go ahead and share my screen.
Are we supposed to be seeing the screen? The one in front of us?
Before I start, can someone confirm if you all can see the presentation?
We actually cannot.
Jacqueline,
Oh,
we
well.
can see the screens. Chair, it's on your personal monitor.
Okay, okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
they
you.
can see Jacqueline.
Thank you. So good evening, planning commissioners. This presentation, I'll advance slides. We'll start with a brief set of introductions for who's leading this effort, provide an overview of the health and safety element update process and the components that have gone into it so far, and then go over potential policy concepts for inclusion in the safety element itself. So as Luke mentioned, the Community Development Department is leading the effort to update the health and safety element. My name is Jacqueline Brotzman-Rohr with PlaceWorks, and I'm the project manager on the consultant team. And I'm joined this evening by Tammy Seal, who is principal in charge on the consultant team as well. And now for an overview of the project. So to start off, what is a safety element? A safety element is one of the mandatory elements of a general plan focusing on natural and human-caused hazards within and surrounding Cupertino, as well as emergency preparedness and response. The current element was adopted in 2014 during the comprehensive general plan update. And the goal of this element is to protect the city and help increase resilience to natural hazards for residents, businesses, infrastructure, and the environment. So these hazards in Cupertino include flooding, wildfire, emergency evacuations, and hazards that may worsen due to climate change, such as extreme heat and drought. So while state laws require the safety element to be updated when the housing element is updated, the health and safety element is just one part of Cupertino's overall approach to protecting the community against hazards. And it integrates with several other city documents to do this, as shown on the slide. So the safety element is a high-level, broad document that discusses the city's comprehensive public safety approach. There's also the Climate Action Plan 2.0, which is a comprehensive plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase resilience throughout the city. There's the Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is a more detailed short-term action plan. And then the Emergency Response Plan, which is the city's internal document for and plan for emergency response and recovery. So the safety element will integrate information from these plans and tie into them as appropriate to help create a cohesive safety approach. Other benefits of updating the health and safety element are to ensure consistency with other general plan elements in city plans, comply with California government code requirements, and improve eligibility for grant funding to implement resiliency and hazard mitigation projects. So the current health and safety element addresses some of the items required by California Government Code Section 65302D, which has the safety element requirements. And these include mapping of flood hazard and dam failure zones, responsible agencies for flood protection and coordination with those agencies, policies for minimizing development in flood zones, agencies responsible for fire protection, and there are a few policies as well for protecting the community from wildfire risk. So the update to this safety element will build off the existing element to meet the current state requirements. Since the previous update of the general plan in 2014, several new laws related to safety elements have come into effect. So as shown on this slide, these updates to the government code increase requirements in the wildfire and flood sections to identify responsible agencies and ensure coordination among these agencies, as well as minimize the risk to new buildings and essential facilities. There's a focus on climate change adaptation and resilience through SB 379, which requires safety elements to prepare a vulnerability assessment that identifies risks to hazards and then develop subsequent goals, policies, and implementation actions to build resilience in the community. There's AB 2140, which allows for the incorporation of the local hazard mitigation plan, making the city potentially eligible for increased disaster relief funds. And then there are three new laws, SB 99, AB 747, and AB 1409, that focus specifically on evacuation, requiring the identification of route and location capacity, safety, and viability, and then also requiring the identification of evacuation-constrained residential areas. as part of the health and safety element update, one study that is being conducted is a citywide AB 747 evacuation study. The city has partnered with Fair and Pierce to complete this. And this study in particular will identify evacuation routes and evacuation locations, and then their information about capacity, safety, and viability under different hazard or emergency scenarios. The second study that was conducted for the safety element update is the vulnerability assessment. This assessment was prepared pursuant to SB 379 or Government Code Section 65302 G4. And this evaluates how people and key community assets such as buildings, infrastructure, economic systems may be affected by climate change hazards and then the degree to which they're vulnerable. So the study followed the 4-step process outlined in the California Adaptation Planning Guide, including identifying exposure to hazards, analyzing the sensitivity of populations and community assets and the potential impacts of the hazards, evaluating adaptive capacity, which is the ability of populations and assets to prepare for and recover from hazards using existing tools and resources, and then ultimately assess vulnerability. The vulnerability assessment was also based on several previous studies conducted by the city, including 3 high-level vulnerability assessments and 1 adaptation gap analysis. This slide shows the climate-related hazards included in the vulnerability assessment, including more frequent poor air quality due to smoke and other conditions, increases in frequency of drought conditions, more frequent extreme heat events, increased flooding and higher sea levels, more intense rainfall and severe weather events leading to increased landslides as well, and then more frequent and severe wildfires. The vulnerability assessment evaluated how these 8 different climate-related hazards may affect 45 different population groups and community assets throughout the city. And this slide shows the key findings of the vulnerability assessment, which found that Cupertino's populations and assets are most vulnerable to flooding, extreme heat, and wildfire. And overall, residents tend to be most vulnerable to extreme heat, human health hazards, and flooding, which directly affect health outcomes. The most vulnerable of these population groups include those with chronic illnesses and/or disabilities, seniors living alone, households in poverty, and persons experiencing homelessness. Infrastructure and key services are also highly vulnerable, especially energy delivery and communication infrastructure, the transportation network, so major roads and highways, including the public transit services, and water and wastewater services. All of these can be disrupted by flooding that causes roadways to become impassable, extreme heat that strain the electricity system, severe storms that cause public safety power shutoffs. So based on new state laws, the findings from the vulnerability assessment, and the AB 747 evacuation study, we've prepared the following broad policy concepts for review and feedback. These policy concepts were also prepared in coordination with the Emergency Management Department, Santa Clara County Fire Department, and Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. So the policy concepts are broken into 6 main topics. In the health and safety element, the first 5 are in the current version of the safety element, and then the climate change resilience topic is being proposed to respond to the requirements of SB 379 or Government Code Section 65302 G4. And then 2 topics that are currently in the safety element are not included in this update, but would remain in the safety element, and those are electromagnetic fields and noise. So each of the following policy concept slides are divided into 3 categories: existing, updated, and new. Existing are those that are already in the existing adopted safety element. Updated are those that could be updated as part of this safety element update. And then new, which are new policy concepts proposed as part of this update. We've also added asterisks next to those policy concepts directly related to new development, redevelopment, for existing development. So with that, I will get into the policy concepts. The first category is emergency preparedness and response. For this, we do have existing, updated, and new. This is one of the lengthier sections. For policy concepts for existing, we have coordinate with regional and local agencies on regional hazard mitigation planning, protect Cupertino generally from sea level rise through different means, continue crime prevention through awareness programs and building site design. And then under the updated category, there was already a concept for providing emergency communications and notices and hazard preparation information. The update would be to add in multiple languages and formats appropriate for people with access and functional needs. For new policy concepts, and this does span 2 slides, so the first 3 are related to development. So ensuring development and redevelopment comply with the latest version of the California Building Code, requiring new development to have at least 2 ingress and egress routes, and exploring secondary means of access in evacuation-constrained residential areas, requiring hillside development to provide and maintain adequate emergency access, ensuring adequate evacuation through maintenance of evacuation routes, and then also ensuring adequate response times for emergency services. And continuing with new policies in this category, integrating the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan into the safety element, maintaining mutual aid and interjurisdictional cooperation and coordination with agencies, working with Santa Clara County to provide alerts about emergencies and using their early warning and notification systems, and then working with local agencies, volunteer groups, and community-based organizations to provide resources and educational materials to the community. The next topic is fire hazards, and there are existing, updated, and new policy concepts. For existing, there is discourage the use of private security gates that act as a barrier to emergency response. Under updated, requiring new development and high and very high fire hazard severity zones to comply with California state minimum fire safe regulations. And this covers a broad range of development requirements such as defensible space, ingress and egress, emergency access, and water supply. Coordinating long-term water supply for firefighting through water extension letters and coordinating with water providers, requiring existing public and private roadways to comply with current safety standards, and then involving Santa Clara County Fire Department early in the development projects to ensure modifications as needed. So the new policy concepts being proposed under fire hazards, the first is related to development, avoiding new residential development in high fire risk areas, maintaining adequate fire protection and enhanced fire service capabilities, prioritizing vegetation management along roadways and open space areas, developing plans for rebuilding and redeveloping after a major wildfire, and then offering educational materials, rebates, incentives for property owners to improve fire safety. The next topic is hazardous waste and materials. There are several existing policy concepts and only a few updated and new. So existing, coordinating enforcement of standards for containment, handling, and disposal of hazardous materials in accordance with state and regional regulatory requirements, providing educational resources to residents about local sources of hazardous materials, supporting efforts to reduce the level of risk from toxic and hazardous materials in Cupertino. And then for updated, and this is related to development, requiring environmental site assessments and mitigation for development near hazardous waste and material sites. And then a new policy concept related to radio frequency studies. So continuing to require these studies for wireless developments and address public concerns about radio frequency exposure and transparency. The next topic is seismic and geologic hazards. This one is similar to hazardous materials, not many new or updated policy concepts. So existing required geologic and seismic hazard assessments in hazard-prone areas, increasing public awareness, encouraging retrofits of existing buildings and infrastructure, maintaining and sharing up-to-date seismic and geologic hazard data. And then the new policy concept is to limit hillside grading on steep slopes to minimize landslide and erosion risk. So flooding and inundation hazards. There are quite a few existing policy concepts already in the element. Existing would be to coordinate dam-related evacuation plans and notification systems to ensure preparedness, maintaining structural and operational integrity of essential public facilities during and after floods. In the updated concepts, these are related to development. So allow existing non-residential uses in floodplains, and then limiting new development in 100-year floodplains and regulatory floodways, and encouraging open space and recreation uses in these areas. And the new policy concept is maintaining effective stormwater drainage systems through site design, infrastructure design, and retrofitting existing systems. The last policy topic, climate change resilience. This is a new policy, a new topic to the health and safety element. So there are no existing or updated policies. For new policy concepts, the first two are related to development, working with property owners and new developments to enhance shading through installation of shade structures and green infrastructure in both public and private spaces to address extreme heat, encouraging new developments and existing property owners to incorporate sustainable features into their facilities, integrating extreme heat as a significant hazard of concern into emergency preparedness and response planning, working with water providers to implement water conservation measures, broadly increasing the resilience of city-owned structures to severe weather events, establishing community resilience centers, community-wide outside of hazard zones, and ensuring adequate transit services to these facilities. And finally, using green infrastructure and nature-based solutions wherever feasible to absorb the impacts of hazards. So with that concludes our presentation. Staff and our Placeworks team are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. I'd like to maybe kick off with a few basic questions, and then we can open it up. If you can talk about, has this been done in other cities in your experience, and what were the primary changes that you observed in updates to the health and safety element, if you have seen these updates in other cities?
So these updates, we've seen them statewide due to recent updates in California Government Code Section 65302G, which are the safety element requirements. There have been updates or updated requirements since about 2014, requiring increased information for fire and flooding, integration of climate adaptation and resilience, and there's newer requirements for those evacuation pieces as well. The updates in other jurisdictions, I think, vary widely depending on what the main issues and hazards are in those cities. The policy concepts would likely be similar if there were similar hazards in those jurisdictions.
And specifically, have you seen any updates related to the changes in the fire severity hazard maps from the state that have been published? Have you seen health and safety element updates that have occurred after that?
So the fire hazard severity zone maps are very recently being approved and implemented and integrated into safety elements around the state. And I know all Bay Area jurisdictions are in kind of the second wave of approvals for the CAL FIRE fire hazard severity zone maps. The biggest change is the changes to the map itself. There are some regulations that change, but really those stricter regulations just cover a broader area.
And maybe one last question from me before I open it up. So what about the timelines? Where is PlaceWorks in this process right now from a timeline perspective? And what is average or typical timeline for the updates? And what should we expect in this process as we look ahead?
So in this portion of the project, we are drafting goal background of the safety, revising the health and safety element background mapping. We're also starting to draft the goals, policies, and strategies updates. We're expecting to have another study session, as Luke was saying, on Thursday with the Public Safety Commission. And then I believe the timeline would be the intent is to take the full safety element for approval hearings by the end of the year.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Shaw.
So I think all this was prepared prior to AB 306 being signed by the governor, and also all the weakening of CEQA, which was also signed. So, and several of the items in your presentation relate directly to some of the legislation that would make it difficult to implement some of those proposals that you had. So was this latest legislation considered in the preparation of your proposal? You know, I don't know if you even read AB 306 yet, it's so new, but it's basically telling cities, oh, you can't make any changes to your building standards for whatever reason, for earthquakes or flood or whatever.
If I could just jump into
Yeah.
it, I think the bill is so new, I can tell you I haven't gotten through all of it yet as well. And this project was scoped some time ago.
Right.
Essentially with the housing element.
So I don't know if it has to be modified due to all this new legislation that just passed.
I don't see that legislation impacting the safety element.
Okay.
I don't really see why it would. This is more of a policy document, and I think like what Jacqueline's alluding to is that for cities, it's really like, what do you see as your major issues? I mean, some places fire hazard is obviously fairly high, seismic issues fairly high, but you're trying to address the policies and the safety element that fit your community. So I don't know that in terms of like changes to streamlining CEQA and zoning, that's going to really be affecting this process.
And what about the changes to building standards, or the inability of cities to upgrade their building standards for safety reasons or for any reasons?
Yeah. Again, I would need to read the specific language
Okay.
on that. You know, I do think one of the things that was a very recent change was the fire hazard safety zone map, which was just adopted by the city and is now in effect, which largely affects the building code more than anything else. But the safety element will be referencing that and replacing the old WIFA map. So, you know, again, but think of this more as a policy document than really a regulatory document that's going to limit zoning changes that the city could do.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, this might be tangentially related to Commissioner Sharf's question, but for, you know, requiring new development to have ignition-resistant materials, defensible space, all that, are ADUs as a category kind of exempt from that, since they have their own set of regulations?
ADUs still have to meet building and fire codes, so all of that would still apply to them.
Even in terms of different material requirements?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. I also had another question around water supply. I know that was mentioned here in the report. When we are monitoring water supply for new developments, are we also monitoring the impact of new developments on the water supply of surrounding areas? and making sure that they do not detract from that? Or?
So when we do receive will serve letters from the water supplier, the water companies, they do consider their overall water supply, not just the water supply to that one development.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I guess I had a sort of follow-on questions. So is the intent to just limit these updates to the required state law areas or sections as per what was mentioned in the earlier government codes and SB state laws? Or are we going to take a fuller pass on this doc, given that we do not update this frequently? I noticed I think we covered a broad section of the doc, but the noise aspects of health and safety element were not included. Are there any considerations to updating noise as a part of this update?
I think the goal is to really comply with state standards on that. If there was a desire to go beyond that or identify issues that are unique or of higher concern to Cupertino, I think this would be a good opportunity, since it's a study session and we don't have a draft document yet, to see if those comments could be included in the document.
Yeah, I'm looking at the health and safety element in our general plan, and we pretty much covered everything except noise. That's the only exception. So it would be nice to take a look at noise and include that if we can. That way we've done a pass through. I don't think it's a lot. It's probably a page or two. So it would be nice to include noise if we can. Okay. And specifically, I know this has been a hot topic within the city, and there's been, I think, areas of feedback around obviously the pickleball noise and what can be done about that, but also some of the noise from the trucking and the quarry activities, which I believe continues with some of the rock excavations happening. And then there's also been noise complaints around just the whole construction hours and so on. So as we increase construction, I think this continues to be an area of public feedback, so it would be good to include noise. My other question on this topic was around I see the various policies, but does PlaceWorks have a sense of whether these policy gaps attempt to make a distinction between how we approach policy on new land use versus modification of existing land use, specifically existing single-family homeowners and the impact to them versus new land use coming up through, let's say, new R3 or R4 projects and so on?
So at this stage, they are policy concepts. When we turn them into full policies, they can be specific for existing development, redevelopment, or new land uses and development.
Okay. So we should expect to see that distinction as this evolves into a policy draft?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I think for development issues, if you're talking about, say, intensification or development on undeveloped lots versus, say, single-family homes, you could distinguish policies at a planning level, but where it's, say, getting a building code issue and, say, the fire hazard zones we've talked about, that's going to treat them the same depending on what zone they're in, which is largely going to get to building materials, defensible space, and all of those issues would be treated alike, whether it was, a significant addition to a single-family home or a new townhome development.
And then there was some reference to interagency collaboration. Does that include, in our case, the unique quarries that we have to our west? Have those been considered as part of that collaborative effort? Or if not, should the quarry be expanded to be part of that interagency or inter-body communication and collaboration?
So the quarry isn't an agency above itself. There is collaboration with the county, but as the quarry itself, no, that doesn't warrant its own collaboration separately.
So maybe I will hold this to the discussion phase, but it would seem that since 2014, the quarry, at least the Lehigh quarry, has ceased operations, and so there's a greater risk from a fire readiness, fire management perspective in the quarry lands as opposed to what it used to be, perhaps. So it would be an area to look at on how collaboration can be established if it hasn't been previously between the city and the quarry. So And again, that might be string into discussions, so I'm willing to segue into public comments if there are no other questions from commissioners. Sounds like no other questions. Any public comments, Madam City Clerk?
We have one speaker in person and one hand raised on Zoom. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you for explaining where this item came from, because I didn't remember anything like this. And I'll tell you, I'm very suspicious of the sixth cycle housing element, so I'm always thinking that it's going to be doing something to us. In this case, if it's working with the general plan, it's good, because the more remediation and plans we make, the better. It sounds like this is something that's been going on. I remember when the city did a study about water, if the dam up at Stevens Creek broke, what happened, where the inundation areas were, and we're very familiar with Los Gatos. If that dam broke, you've got water coming down into the valley. So I will tell you that I'm very, very pleased that Placework, the planning department, and the city is really taking this responsibility. We are in a very seismic area. We are subject to fires. We're subject to narrow roads, evacuation, etc. My mother is in the Rio Del Mar Conservancy area, which is a tsunami zone. It is active. We have had tsunami activity there 3 times in the last 15 years. And during the 1989 earthquake, I understand from a former classmate that there was some tsunami activity at Seacliff. I didn't know this until we had gone to a class reunion. In that regard, I will tell you that when you have, I went through the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. My grandfather was in the process of subdividing property in Soquel, California, in the mountains. The water tank that had just been put in by helicopter turned over because of the activity, and it rolled down the hill. This is a multi-thousand capacity water tank that was on a pad. There was so much rocking action that thing actually turned over, spilled water all the way down. I think it went 1/4 mile, it rolled. And these are the things that people don't understand until you've gone through a major earthquake. My aunt's house, the first one that was in Soquel, it was basically damaged. It's been abandoned. The property was bought, but my cousin actually went up there about a year ago and looked at it. Her other home they had a landslide behind it. So yes, we need to be aware of what is happening. If you're not familiar, Rio Del Mar Avenue down to Seacliff Beach is very, very narrow, but it is a tsunami evacuation route. We have to make sure we're prepared and ready to go.
Thank you, Jennifer. That is your time. We have 2 hands raised on Zoom. First, we have Peggy, followed by David. Welcome, Peggy.
Good evening, planning commissioners and staff. Thank you for reviewing this and updating it. I sent email in, but I'm going to highlight some of the items that I really am concerned about. One is financial burdens to homeowners. With the new policies and goals that you are considering, please do not add financial burdens to homeowners that are not making any modifications to their homes. Also, do not add annual or periodic inspections to homes. Emergency preparedness and response, identify the key facilities that need battery backup to go through. We were out of power for 5 days with Loma Prieta, and battery backup would have been really nice. Water pressure, you talk about water supply and new developments and areas, but you don't talk about water pressure. And in the Linda Vista area, I've been told that some residents have had to add their own water pump just to have normal water, adequate water pressure. on a day-to-day basis. God forbid they would have a fire and would need, the fire department would need water pressure. Fire stations, we have a large added density to our city. Please look at, or do we have adequate fire stations? If everything was built out as planned? And if not, where do they need to be and what do they need to look like? Hazardous waste and materials, identify the sites that must have an environmental site assessment. Put them on a map so we can see them, and identify them. The current, any adjacent site that is current or old gas stations, current or old tanks, current or old dry cleaner tend to have problems. Flood and inundation, whatever it is, hazards, do not allow non-residential uses in floodplains other than recreational. Avoid any businesses, healthcare facilities, emergency services, public health facilities, schools and daycares. Noise, I second the chair's need. Our noise thing is 10 years old and it shows 70 decibels as the max. We're at 80 or 90. We live right next door to 280. And we have many thoroughfares that have high noise. And we're planning trails along these freeways and kids' ears. We need to protect them. Excessive heat, add the location.
Thank you, Peggy. That is your time. Up next, we have David. Welcome, David.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm speaking on the safety element update under Government Code. I believe it's 65302, and that requires Cupertino to map and address wildfire risk, evacuation capacity when planning for housing, among other things. And as the discussion just now expanded on, it's a responsibility of the city that it has under state planning laws, and that's separate from CEQA. To be specific, Evelich Court. That's a widely talked about topic for some time now, but Evelich Court, it sits in a very high fire hazard severity zone, and this area has limited evacuation routes already. And before adding significant density here, the city needs to show clearly whether the roads, water supply, emergency services can handle the worst case fire scenarios without considering the additional residents that the development would impose. And while the housing element may have identified this site previously as a site for housing, the safety element now being updated still needs to be consistent with the reality that's on the ground. And state law doesn't allow the city to ignore safety requirements when approving housing, no matter how strong the pressure exists to add units. So as the city updates the safety element, I encourage you to apply strong safety requirements to new high-density developments in these very high-risk areas, while also being careful to not place unreasonable burdens on existing single-family homeowners that could be financially or practically impossible to meet. And residents don't want to see their costs or inspections pushed so high that people are forced out of their homes, to what the previous speaker said. And this is ultimately about ensuring that the new development doesn't increase risk during an emergency. We are counting on the city to apply and approve a safety element that meaningfully is aligned with its housing plans that also protects public safety. So urge you to take the opportunity to address these safety obligations so residents can trust that new development will not outpace the city's ability to protect its people. I don't think we're asking for any special treatment, just that safety be prioritized as the law requires, so that it's a safe place for everyone. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. We have no speakers in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. At this time, we will then close public comment on this agenda item and bring it back to the Commission for discussion. Any commissioners want to offer initial comments?
Are we going to go topic by topic?
Uh,
I think that might be easier.
Yeah, before we do that, I just wanted to check if staff or PlaceWorks wanted to respond to a couple of the public comments that we heard. I think there was one on, let's start with David's comments maybe. I think he was asking something about the applicability of these comments to Evelich. Can staff or PlaceWorks comment on, given that this needed to be done as a part of the housing element, and it is now being done post-housing element? Are there any considerations from this update that will apply to the in-progress applications, be it Evelich or McClellan Road?
No, this is not going to be modifying the housing element. So this is being done because the update is required to be in conjunction with the housing element update, so it's getting done now. But we're not going to be going back and revisiting any housing element sites through this process.
Maybe to tease that apart a little bit, if there is an application that is in progress right now and it is being evaluated for CEQA, for example, would the CEQA evaluation include this updated safety element goals as part of its consideration, or?
Individual projects would be looked at as individual projects, and if there's one you have in mind that's not on the agenda tonight, I really can't be talking about an individual development project that's not on the agenda.
Yeah, not so much an individual project question, but more a general question for applications in progress. When would the updated safety element be factored in? Is that only for new applications received, or is it in any part of consideration for applications in progress?
If under CEQA you had a project that had an EIR, the notice of preparation is the point where you freeze the baseline conditions for the project. We really don't have any project at that point right now. So we would look at, again, the merits of a project. If it warranted whatever level of environmental review, that's what it would get. Whether it's exempt, would be doing a negative declaration, or an EIR.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is when you get to notice of preparation, if you did for any project, at that point is when you would look at the safety element in effect at that time.
We would be looking at the safety element that is in place. We have one right now.
Mm-hmm.
But under CEQA, if you're doing an EIR, the notice of preparation is the point in time you're locked in terms of what your site's baseline conditions are and the standards that are in effect.
Thank you. And that leads to the question of where else is the safety element consulted in these life cycles of applications?
Well, since it's part of the general plan's really consulted on just about anything discretionary. You're looking for consistency with applicable policies, whether it's the land use element, transportation element, or the safety element. So where there was anything that's addressed in the safety element, we would be looking for consistency with that policy.
If I may also add to that, so there are policies that are going to be in the general plan, and to the extent that there would need to be regulations related to those policies, then those would be looked at and added to the municipal code as necessary.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That was David's questions, and I think there were some other questions on water tanks, which is interesting because our health and safety element actually has a map of water tanks. So I think that would be good feedback there, Jennifer. But I don't know if staff or PlaceWorks wants to comment on. Is the water tank in the city jurisdiction? Is that county? Is that quarry? Do we know where these water tanks are currently placed and how they're regulated?
Some of the water tank on the water tank map that the city currently has, some of those are private water tanks. Others are, there's the large one that I believe it's the San Jose Water that owns that one, and so those are just mapped for purposes of the general plan as a policy to kind of just see where those water tanks are, and in general, that I believe that map is probably going to be updated and included in the health and safety element. But in terms of whether a water tank is required or not, that comes out of discussions with the fire district, and water pressure is taken into consideration at that time as well.
Yeah, I believe the water tanks are mostly mapped for flooding concerns, that if they were to have a problem with them.
Yeah, sounds like the speaker brought up some valid feedback around seismic safety of the water tanks, and that may be more for the discussion phase, but something for Placeworks to consider.
Those, sir, are already considered when they are constructed with the building codes in effect at the time.
Okay. And are there inspection requirements on these water tanks?
I think the fire department may, but I don't quote me on that one. But I do believe that they may go out and actually check up on them.
Okay. I believe that was about the public comments. I know Peggy had some comments as well, but I think we will cover that in the discussion phase. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion. If we want to go, however we want to go, I'll just open it up for commissioners who would like to go first. Commissioner Linscott.
Thank you. Okay, so going through the first one, which is the emergency preparedness and response thing. So I was talking to residents in Seven Springs, and they are now in an extremely high fire zone, and it's been really interesting talking to them because they don't know what they're supposed to do. They're having a really hard time finding out what they're supposed to do. There's not adequate education, and everybody they talk to kind of says, oh, well, water district, we're not responsible for clearing the brush. The county is not responsible for doing this. Like, they all have their roles, but for a layman to understand what all those roles are and how they play with each other and how to kind of navigate that to mitigate the risk for their property seems to be a pretty big gap right now. So one of my comments on this would be twofold. One is we need to really improve our communications, and I think we captured that in here somewhere, but in the last bullet it said educational programs, but I just want to highlight that that's a major gap right now, and that's a real issue, that especially for all these residents in these suddenly high risk areas, there's no education, there's no videos, there's no documentation, there's no understanding of who does what and who covers what. So that's a pretty urgent thing that I think we need to do as a city. And related to that is strengthening partnerships with schools, businesses, neighborhoods, counties, open space, water district, Caltrans, VTA, like all the responsible bodies to work through like who does what and make sure there are no gaps. And so really strengthening those partnerships is something that I didn't see on here, so I wanted to highlight that that's something that that would be really important. And then I did have a follow-up question on Evelich also, when I see bullet number 2 that says new developments have to have at least 2 ingress and egress routes. For a new development like Evelich, how do we define egress and ingress and egress? Just curious how that definition is made.
I would just think at a basic level, you're going to have 2 independent points to go in and out. So
Okay.
you'd not, let me say,
So it's not
like
like
a
one
cul-de-sac, having one would not work.
Okay.
And I think one of our maps we had in there, where it was looking at evacuation routes, and maybe I'm mislabeling it, but you notice a lot of cul-de-sacs, even outside of the hillside, showed up for that very reason.
Right.
Because you only have one way in and out. So that is something through new development that would need to be addressed. So
Okay.
that you would have more than one independent way if something were
But
to
like,
happen.
if I'm standing in front of, I'll use Evelich as an example, right? I can go left or I can go right. Is that considered 2 egresses?
No, going different directions out of the same point, no.
Okay.
You would need to have 2 different points, which you could go 1 or 2 different directions.
Got
But the issue is really not having that point where people have to get in or out blocked.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you could go 2 ways or not, you would need 2 different areas.
Okay.
And I will also say this, that the fire district is the one that makes those determinations. So regardless of, what we discuss here, it's really the fire department that determines whether they have 2 routes of egress or not.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Those were my comments on this subject.
Thank you, Commissioner Linscott. Who wants to go next?
Okay, so
Vice
feedback on the emergency preparedness and response. I would want to add a point in the safety element that the EOC must be adequately staffed and trained. This is something that I've seen in another city's safety element, and I think it might be helpful to add it to ours. I've spoken with both CERT volunteers as well as current and former Public Safety Commission members, and it sounds like our CERT volunteer program, which is cited 6 times in the safety element, has dwindled pretty significantly from what it once was. So it used to be at around 100 volunteers active in every meeting. Now it's down to around 20 per meeting, and sometimes meetings aren't even held. So, and I think that really does come back to an issue of staffing, and they do need a primary point of contact or a liaison back with the city. And my understanding is that right now that point of contact doesn't exist. So it would be great to have a point in the plan, just, enforcing that we are committed to having adequate staffing to the EOC. And also eventually upgrading the EOC facility itself. So that's around the EOC. And then on fire hazards, I do agree with I think it's great that we have these additional standards from PlaceWorks around avoiding new residential development in high fire risk areas, as well as potentially increasing defensible space. I did have a question around that. Is the defensible space, I still wasn't really able to find very tangible parameters around the amount of distance of defensible space. It sounds like it's kind of a range, and even CAL FIRE says, for example, if you're in zone 1, it's up to 30 feet or where your property line is. So what exactly does defensible space mean when it's either feet or your property line?
I think it does matter on the size of your property. So, and some of the standards are being worked out where I think the first zone 0, is like 5 feet.
Right.
Then you have, which has the highest standard. You essentially can't have anything flammable up against your house in that zone. Then zone 1, I believe, is 30 feet.
But, or your property line.
Or your property line, because a lot of people could hit their property line at that
Right.
point. And then there's a zone beyond that if you have a larger property that I believe goes out to 100 feet. The standards, I think, are set for all the zones except zone 0, which is closest to your house. So I think while the maps have been adopted, my understanding from talking to fire is that a lot of that is still evolving, the standards. And I think my sense is a lot of this is going to be educational at first, which I think, as Commissioner Lindskog pointed out, is a lot of people, they're aware they're in these zones, but they don't know what it means. CAL FIRE's website is actually very helpful, and some of their videos are. But I think fire agencies throughout the state are largely in a mode now of educating people about what this means before they start getting stricter with enforcement. But right now, my understanding is you have these 3 different zones based on the further you get from the main structure. And the closer you get, the tougher the defensible space needs to be.
Right. But so even for zone 0, if you're an ADU and you have 4 feet, so you don't even have the full 5.
True, but it would all be zone 0.
Okay, yeah. Right, okay. Thank you. And then, my final point was echoing the chair's point around noise. I would be great if we could redefine, so in the noise element currently, they separate noise into transportation-driven noise versus non-transportation-driven noise, but the non-transportation-driven noise does not really include a very large range of noise sources. So if we could redefine that to include noise coming from, say, community sports activities, I think that would be more comprehensive of the types of complaints that we are hearing from today. So that would be my next.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I think that the noise aspect is one that's come up before and would be good to include. Commissioner Scharf, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I was trying to search for something, but our internet's down.
I can fill while you're searching if you'd like.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
In relation to what Tracy said regarding CERT, we used to have quarterly or every other month meetings with our sheriff and fire chief and other public safety officials. And I think those need to resume. They haven't had them in about 3 years for some reason. And I would like something in there, something in this document to require that we restart these periodic meetings with our regional safety officials. And I don't, maybe someone can comment on why those were discontinued. Or,
I wish I could. I do not know.
okay. Yeah. Someone contacted me the other day, said, hey, you know, when you were mayor, did you, I said, yeah, we had those meetings all the time over in the old council chambers. I didn't even know that they had been stopped. But apparently, like after COVID, they never came back. And I think those are really important as part of this, part of this whole public safety procedure. That's really all I had. Everything else was covered already by other commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Scharf. So I want to go back to my feedback to PlaceWorks. I'd like for PlaceWorks and this draft as it develops to be very, very discerning on how you approach existing homeowners versus new R3 and R4 development. I think the burdens need to be carefully assessed on existing homeowners. We do not want to burden our existing homeowners with new policy, especially if it is not going through a major development. I understand if there's a major development, there's existing state law and building codes that will apply. But absent major development, I'd like to make sure that the draft distinguishes between, because there's language in here, as I look at the PlaceWorks memo, that says new development. And I think that that's too generic. And I'd like to make sure that PlaceWorks is very, very precise in how we approach existing homeowners versus new high-density non-R1 and non-R2 development. And not to combine them all into the same. Because, for example, if you have a new R1 that is being developed on a street that happens to be a cul-de-sac, is the onus now on the property owner to provide an emergency egress because there was only one entry into that cul-de-sac, and what happens to that homeowner? Is he required to improve the cul-de-sac entryway to create a second egress? Or I don't understand how this policy gap is going to be addressed with new R1 developments. And I'm looking at Luke because PlaceWorks isn't here, but either of you might care to comment.
Well, you're talking about, say, developing a single-family home on an existing cul-de-sac.
Yeah, let's just say we have a 1950s property that's being torn down.
There would be no nexus for you to be able to have to put a second access in for a situation like that. I think what we're talking about with new development and having more than one access is, one, you're in a fire hazard zone, and two, it's new development as in units that didn't exist. So
Well,
an undeveloped
yeah.
lot or a lot that is adding units.
Yeah, I just want to go back to this. You know, we have this conversation about you're in a fire hazard zone, but that term applies to half of Cupertino right now. And nothing has materially changed in the conditions for that part of Cupertino other than these Sacramento maps that have descended upon us. And so I want us to be very careful. Just because Sacramento deems these lands as being high fire hazard zone or very high, the conditions materially have not changed in these areas. And so we just need to be, being on the ground, I think we owe it to our existing homeowners to just be careful in how we approach this and not subject them to requirements that really weren't there yesterday before these maps descended upon us. And that is particular feedback. This is not a question. This is feedback. Since PlaceWorks is soliciting feedback, I want to make sure PlaceWorks is hearing this loud and clear. Hopefully they're taking notes. I know at least one of the PlaceWorks consultants seems to be taking notes. I'd like to make sure that this draft as it evolves, because we may not have time to, and are we doing community hearings with this draft? Is there going to be, like the ODS community hearing that we had, would we have some hearings on this?
Right now, we're planning on having this study session and one study session Thursday night. And then this would be going back for the draft to be available, where we do not have a range of community meetings planned for this update. That's not in the scope of work.
Is it possible to include this in the ODS community hearings that we will be having so that both can be, and maybe that's a question for PlaceWorks, is it possible to put up both at the same time, or?
They're two separate contracts with two scopes of work. If we were to add more, if there was a desire, say, for the city council to want to turn this into a larger project with additional meetings, we would have to change the scope of work and add budget to accommodate that.
So this may be an offline discussion then, because I think the community has a lot of concern about these fire severity hazard maps or fire hazard severity maps, and I think we owe it to them to be able to at least get their input in. And I know with the housing element, there's always this angst about not being involved in the process, and we don't want to leave it. Likewise with this one. So,
If I can just clarify one thing too for anyone listening, the fire hazard maps are already adopted.
understood.
So I'm just like, they are in place, and you cannot remove properties that are designated by the state on those fire hazard maps. So that sort of is what it is, and it affects the city's building code. And I
Yeah,
don't-
and to be very specific on my feedback, just so it's clear, I think where we want to be really careful is when PlaceWorks comes back converting these policy gaps into language in the draft updates. We want those updates to not impact our existing homeowners. And I'd like to hear from PlaceWorks if you have any clarifying questions on that feedback.
Well, we speak for them. I think it's clear as you have a standard where you don't want homeowners impacted.
Right.
But new development, say a townhome development, could be treated with a different standard than existing residents, is what I'm hearing.
Right, yes.
Can I,
thank you.
if I may ask a clarifying question, Chair? If a single-family homeowner were wanting to split their property and redevelop it, would you say that the same standard, the same threshold would apply for the two? I mean, if I had property there and I wanted to subdivide,
I
it's
would
just a
not
question,
wanna.
it's
I
just-
would not want to burden R1 lot split with these policies. I would like to limit it to R3 and R4.
Okay, so that is
Can-
your feedback. Thank
Can
you.
I ask a clarification? So, for example, if somebody who's in R1 in a very high density, I mean, a high fire zone, is getting new roofing or siding, would we not want them to put in fire resistant?
Yeah,
or
my
require
understand.
fire resistant roofing or siding or
Good
things-
question. My understanding is that is outside the scope of this because that is state building code, and they would have to adhere to the state building code. Now the question is whether the state building code is. Are we on the 2024 building code? Have you adopted the 2024 building code?
I'm not sure where we're at now with the
I have
building
no
code.
idea, but I do believe that the next building code cycle will be applicable as of January 1st next
Yeah,
year.
it's next year.
Okay. So yes, so the building code would be what it is as adopted by Cupertino.
I know, but if we say that we don't want them affected in any way, but then, I mean, we are going to require them to have more fire-resistant roofing or siding,
Right.
they are going to be affected.
And what I'm clarifying is that the building code is outside the scope of this review. So this safety element apparently does not override the building code. And that's what staff tells me, and feel free to.
But no, they're independent. I mean, the building code is an ordinance. It's the law. This is a policy document. So the building code and the fire hazard zone maps, which are incorporated into that, they're already in effect. So that is currently something that has already
I'm
changed.
just wondering why we want to write something that is in conflict to what the building code would be. What costs are you envisioning we would burden them with that you don't want them to be burdened with? Can you clarify that?
So the policy gaps, as we go through these, there's a number of policy gaps that refer to new developments. And in any of those cases where it refers to new developments, I'd like it to apply to R3 and R4 and not to R1, which is existing. Well, we can go through this list. We talked about ingress and egress. If you just go through this whole list, there's a whole bunch of new development references. So ingress, egress was one of them. Require and maintain emergency access was another one. Well, I guess we could go through this and look at it. But I think the gist of the feedback is that we don't want to see existing homeowners burdened with undue regulations outside of the building code coming from a state level, or rather from a local safety element.
I guess I'm struggling to understand what would be onerous about it if we want them to have, fire-resistant building standards, and we want proper, defensible space, and so what is acceptable and what is undue?
Right. So again, to clarify, as I understand it, building code and fire code is outside the scope of this discussion. And so this comment does not apply to building code or fire code. We have no ability to override state level building code and fire code is what I understand from staff.
I did want to add one thing. For example, you talked about the egress and maintenance of egress of roads. That is also a fire code requirement. I mean, if you have a street, if you live up in the hills, you have a private driveway and it's not well maintained, the fire department cannot get to your house, potentially your neighbor's house.
But the fire code explicitly states that applies at a certain DU per acre.
That
It does not apply to single family.
That's RHS. It's just single family. It's actually even lower density than single family.
So if I recall my reading of the egress requirements, there's a certain DU per acre at which it applies. And it would not be a lot split or a single family development. I'm talking about a single lot owner, an R1 development, as opposed to R3 townhome, for example.
But if they had and I'm not trying to argue, I'm just saying if they had a driveway that didn't meet the fire code standards, they would still have to upgrade it to redevelop.
You could still have access standards that would, change your ingress and egress. It might not need to be 2 points, but your driveway would have to comply with fire and safety standards. I mean, the simple way to look at it is fire safety and building standards cannot be waived. They're not discretionary like planning standards where you could get a variance or an exception. They sort of are what they are. You need to comply with them. And once you comply with them, they're ministerial. They can't be denied. And I think the gist of what you're saying, I understand, is there should be some differentiation between, say, a new proposed development versus an existing single-family homeowner who's maybe doing an addition.
Yep.
But in terms of building codes, they are what they are.
Understood. Other comments? Commissioners?
Sorry, just on the fire hazard, I just had one other comment was, I understand the city right now operates on a complaints-based system, and that's due to our, we're resource constrained, we're a small city, I get that. But for homes that are in extremely high or high-risk areas, it seems like we should have a more proactive approach. So my feedback there would be to maybe have a more directed approach where we actually do more directed outreach and education and enforcement and have people go out and check. Like I used to live in the Oakland Hills, right? It's like once a year the fire department comes by every single house and gives us a little card, says yes you're compliant or no you're not compliant, right? So I'm not saying we do that for the entire city, but at least for the extremely high fire risk ones, maybe we establish a different enforcement standard versus a complaints-based one. So if resources permit, of course.
Yeah, I would say that's already part of the fire requirement for brush abatement. Right now, that's what they're doing. I am in the hills and I do get that card. And they do come by for inspections. At least that's what the discussion was in council. They're going to start doing that for starting this year. So, and I believe the next fire preparedness workshop is July 18th right here.
If you know more than I do on that one.
Yeah, I believe July 18th is the next one in Community Hall. So a good one to catch locally. Okay, so the other comment that I did want to make sure PlaceWorks tried to incorporate was how can we collaborate with the quarry? This is a big concern area for those of us on the west side. The quarry is no longer maintaining its property. We see brush growth in levels that we have not seen in previous years. So would like to see how you can expand this notion of interagency, or maybe it is through the county that you work with the quarry. But in either case, we'd like to factor in the risks that are unique to Cupertino from the quarries to our west.
If I can add on that note, I believe there is a meeting here on the 31st of this month related to the quarry that the District 5 supervisor will be here. So that may be an opportunity for people as well if they have any concerns about the quarry.
Yep, thank you. And then just running through this real quick, I think the other one that I wanted to bring up was the flood and inundation hazards. There are limits on new developments, and then it says allow existing non-residential uses. And then the gaps goes into stormwater drainage. but I don't see any coverage of a gap around new non-residential uses in floodplains. And I'd like to see that included. Specifically, I believe the current policy says you allow for existing non-residential uses, but is silent about what is the treatment for new non-residential uses. And I'd like to be explicit on that topic. Any questions on that? Okay.
We'll take a look and see what that means.
And then the other part to this is we are required to look at what is the history of floods and fires. Is that material that PlaceWorks has access to? And how will we get access to that, and how will members of the public get access to that?
I can answer that question. So that the background on flooding, including the history of flood events and flood hazard zones, will be included in the background text of the health and safety element itself. There will also be a background report that will be an appendix or an attachment to the health and safety element that will provide a bit more detail on that.
Thank you. And then there was a comment, again, going back to the public written communication, there was a comment on the hazard mitigation plan and to make that available. Is there such a thing right now? Do we know?
Yes, there is a local hazard mitigation plan. It's the multi-jurisdiction one with a Cupertino annex, and that is available on the city's website. I believe it's the emergency. I can look it up and I can send it to you offline.
So I'm wondering how we can communicate that back to the member of the public that wrote in.
We can get back to them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we have given a reasonable amount of input. PlaceWorks, would you have any questions for commissioners? Oh,
no
yeah.
additional questions.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so for the hazardous waste and material, on the updated one, it says require environmental site assessments and mitigation for developments near hazardous waste and material sites. How are we defining near? So I would like some, specifics.
We don't quite know yet, but it will be in the policy when it is, when the draft's
So
available.
that is kind of important. So that would have been good to have more specifics on that. Is near 500 feet, 20 feet, like a kilometer? Like it's...
I would say adjacent or within like 300 feet. But at this point, I just don't have the specifics yet.
Okay.
But not going out to half a mile or, something ridiculous like that.
Okay, thanks. And then for the climate change resilience, I saw mentions of shading and trees, but I'd like to see it specifically talking about eliminating or identifying and eliminating heat islands, and really talking about the heat, the dangerous heat that can result from unshaded tarmac and asphalt, and really kind of be a little bit more scientific about that, about defining them, identifying them, and then mapping them, and coming up with a plan for reducing them, whether it's a 5-year plan or 10-year plan. And then in terms of what kind of public, how do we encourage more public and private trees to be placed that will replace a lot of the smaller trees that we have right now that are not climate adapted, that will basically die in the next 30 years because they're not adapted to what our climate is going to be in the next 30 years, and replacing them with climate adapted, fire resistant, large shade canopy trees. And I know we've talked about creating a canopy plan, but adding something in here that references that and says, work with the canopy plan to make sure that we transition the city trees on public and private land. And so for private land, that would require education and, incentives or something like that and so coming up with like a very specific 10-year plan for how we're going to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Linscock. That was actually going to be my comment as well. I saw a reference to shading, but it talks about shading through the installation of shade structures in green infrastructure. And it wasn't specific enough about street trees and the urban forest as a specific area of focus. So I'd like to see that the urban forest is factored in. into the policy goals. That's something that council just approved as a CWP, and we want to make sure that we are looking at our street tree canopy as a very intentional approach to battle climate change, as opposed to some of these shade structures and everything else, which are artificial means of accomplishing shade. I'd also like to sort of add a counterpoint to this notion of transitioning the trees that we have, as opposed to letting them age out and then replace them when needed. When we replace these trees, they need watering, and we find that homeowners are not watering these street trees. We see that with the sidewalk replacement. When they replace sidewalks, they replace the mature street trees, and then there isn't watering for the street trees. I can say that, my own street, we lost about 3 street trees over the last 2 years, and homeowners haven't been watering them. I've been lugging 6 gallons of water and watering these trees myself. So we just need to be careful with language here. We cannot expect homeowners to water these trees. Often we have rentals as well. So I wouldn't be looking to explicitly transition anything, but certainly emphasizing the urban forest as a goal would be great, and emphasizing the tree canopy as a goal would be great. Just recognizing that we have homeowners that no matter what you say, they're not watering the trees.
No, that's a good point. And to clarify, I'm not saying we pull out the trees we have right now, but as they die and as we transition, to have a plan for how we do that in a meaningful way, so that we are moving towards a very definite goal versus letting it happen.
Okay, and then I think there was another concern around the toxic and hazardous materials. I don't know how maybe this was Commissioner Scharf's question around state law versus what we can actually set as policy and goals. Do you want to clarify, Commissioner Scharf?
Right, I just want to make sure this policy is not in conflict with the new state laws that are being passed. And I think the state laws would take precedence over anything in this policy. But I did have another comment about the heat islands, because that could be in conflict with our housing element. Every time you build a high density development, you are creating a heat island, and there's really no way around that. You can't really put up artificial shade structures. I know when I first toured the new Apple campus, they were telling me they didn't realize how warm it was inside the ring of the spaceship, and the trees that they had chosen were not appropriate. They had to replace them all. So I don't know if this is in the policy paper, and then, it's great, but then our housing element says, hey, you are building at this density in all these different parcels, and you will create heat islands. There's no, which takes precedence. Obviously, I think the state would say, hey, your housing element is, takes precedence over everything. You can't go in and say, well, we can't approve this project because it conflicts with our, safety policy. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, and that's actually a good lead, and maybe even to the next agenda item, which is, do we need to be updating local documents every time state laws change? Because that's kind of chasing our own tails every time that keeps changing.
It depends. It's good to do so. If you don't, state law is going to override if you have an inconsistent local regulation. I think Commissioner Scharf is right. Where there's a conflict, the state's going to take precedent. And I think we are doing regular updates with things like SB 9 type lot splits, the ADU ordinance, things like that are changing. Density bonus law. But they pretty much change almost every year to some degree, sometimes more often than once a year. So it's difficult to keep the updates fresh. There may be certainly a 6-month or 12-month gap sometimes. Where it's urgent, we try to do it right away. But I think everybody here knows state housing laws have been changing very rapidly.
But as a general approach, the city's been keeping up with these state law changes to reflect that in local general plan and Mooney code updates.
I would say we have done a good job of it, yes.
And is that true across all elements of the general plan?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure there's some things that would be inconsistent to general plans. It's a lengthy document, and sections of it like this are not often updated.
Okay. Yeah, it just feels like a lot of extra work to be factoring these state laws changes because they keep changing.
Yeah.
There's a change
I
and
had
then
a-
there's another change.
I had a couple of other questions, if I have time.
Yeah, please.
One is, and maybe this is not out within the scope of it, but I was just wondering, like, what about like grid resilience or like the cell phone resilience in case of an earthquake, or it's like if the power grid goes down or if our communications grid gets overwhelmed, like they often do in earthquakes. Like, is that part of our emergency preparedness? Is there anything we can do as a city to be better prepared for that? And should that be captured in this document?
I mean, as a policy, yes, you could have something related to that in the health and safety element, but there's probably more detail in the actual emergency operations plans related to how that gets tackled.
Yeah, I'd echo that comment. I think there's educational opportunities around some of these local volunteer organizations that we have in the city. I believe the safety element does talk to what volunteer organizations we have in the city. So being able to tie some of those organizations back into our social outreach through the city's social media channels and workshops to be able to spread awareness of those,
Well,
I think would really help.
Yes, I totally agree with that. But I think we also need to differentiate between operational, which is a lot of the stuff like education and volunteer groups, and infrastructure. And I guess I was thinking, like, we need to beef up both, right? So there's the operational piece of it, which is building up those volunteer organizations again, building up the education and all these preparedness plans, but those are operational plans. What can we do from an infrastructure perspective also? Like, can we encourage more independent solar and storage? It's like, can we, like have more redundancy in our towers? What can we do from an infrastructure perspective to make us better prepared for when the next big earthquake hits?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I don't know if Jacqueline might have something to add. I think it relates to both climate action and safety. A lot of that, and I mean, not having total familiar with all of the different plans out there, like emergency operations, you could incorporate it by reference as well. But I think if your question is going to infrastructure that would be necessary if you had an emergency, yes, that makes sense. An earthquake, you could lose all sorts of communication facilities, and strengthening that or having it more widespread, or even energy that would be independent on its own in case of an outage, that would seem to be appropriate here because it does go to safety.
The general plan also has some policies about ham radio operators because I believe in the last earthquake, that is what kind of helped the city incredibly. And so we do have a pretty robust group of people that do run the ham radio system, if that's what they call it. I'm not sure what the terminology is, but they are out there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to make sure we look at infrastructure and operations separately, because a lot of the conversation so far has been around operational preparedness, and we should be really talking about infrastructure preparedness as well.
Yeah, thank you.
The safety element can encourage.
Thank you, Pio. I just want to add real quick on that item. The reference specifically was for CARE, CERT, and MRC, and that is in the HS2, I believe, of the safety elements. So if we might, this is feedback for PlaceWorks, if we might look at prioritizing a goal around expanded educational and social outreach to residents about the ability to get into some of these volunteer groups and get trained with groups like CARE, CERT, and MRC, if we can include that. And then to Commissioner Linscock's point, to look at what infrastructure improvements need to happen.
Chair, if I may, I think Jacqueline might be saying something, might have been saying something, I'm not sure.
Oh, thank you, Pugh. I was just going to say there is some overlap with grid resilience and the electricity grid between the climate action plan and the safety element. However, as part of the vulnerability assessment, vulnerability of the energy and communication infrastructure was one of the key findings that we found. So it is a topic that we could add to the climate change resilience section.
Thank you. Was the vulnerability assessment shared as one of the, or can it be shared if that is available?
It is still in draft form, Chair, so it will be available when everything is put out.
Great. If there are no other questions.
Oh, I have one question.
Oh, sure.
So, with what happened in Texas last week or earlier this week, do we have any plans for any early warning systems for flash flooding? Say, if the Stevens Creek Dam were to break, I think that may be the only place in Cupertino where we might have a risk of flash floods like that. Because I don't think there's any siren system or anything now.
So my understanding is that we do have a separate Stevens Creek Dam inundation plan that separately talks about how to address any flooding from the dam. So if there was, it wouldn't be in the general plan, it would probably be in that document there. And we can certainly check to see whether it is or not, and then consider whether we need to make any amendments to the actual general plan.
All right, yeah, I appreciate that. 'Cause I was just reading, it said if there had been sirens, they could have evacuated a lot of the people that had perished in those flash floods.
Okay, so this item is not going to go to a vote, since I think we have given qualitative input, and maybe Placeworks, this is your time to ask any final clarifying questions of commissioners, if you have anything. Sounds like no other questions from Placeworks, and with that, I'd like to close this agenda item. Thank you to staff and Placeworks for being patient through this. Thanks to commissioners for all your input, and thanks to the public for writing in and speaking up. So we'll take a short break for 5 minutes while we segue into the next agenda item. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to be moving on to the next agenda item, which is our public hearing, agenda item 3, proposed amendments to the Mooney Code 19.08 and 19.112 ADUs and associated environmental review, application number MCA 2025-001. The recommended action is that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution recommending that the City Council adopt an ordinance to find that the proposed actions are exempt from CEQA and amend the following Chapter 19.08, Chapter 19.112. So with that, if we can go to the staff report, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commission again. We are here because we had to make some amendments to the ADU ordinance due to new state law, and we also received our review of the ADU ordinance from HCD, and with that, I'll pass it on to John, who will go over those.
Thanks, Pew. Good evening, Planning Commissioners and the community at large. This is my presentation for MCA 2025-001, and as detailed by the chair. A little bit of background, and Pew alluded to this already, that the last time the city adopted an ADU ordinance was on February 23rd, 2024, a little over a year, almost a year and a half ago. In accordance with state law, the city did submit that ordinance to HCD for their review supposed to be within 60 days. We did within 5.
If I may pause you there.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. We're seeing the material on Zoom now. It wasn't visible. There was a lag.
Oh.
We see it now. Thank you.
No problem. So HCD on April 24th, 2025, a little over a year, more than a year after we had submitted our new ordinance to them for review, they sent us a letter, summarize their findings, and identify some key areas where the city needed to make some updates, particularly as it reflects within two state bills, one Assembly bill, one Senate bill, that went into effect were approved and went into effect long after the ordinance was submitted for their review. The city, within the 30 days indicated within the letter, that was also attached to the staff report. The city did respond to HCD on May 19, 2025, stating 2 things. Its intent to comply with all provisions of state law, as well as amend the municipal code by September 30th, 2025. So, as discussed in the staff report, two state bills were adopted after the city had approved this ordinance and submitted the ordinance for HCD review. The first was Senate Bill 1211, which we respond by amending Table 19. 112030B, which allows existing multifamily dwellings, 8 detached units, but no more than the number of existing units on that lot. A proposed multifamily dwelling or multifamily development, not more than 2 detached ADUs, regardless of size. So you can have, whether it's a 4-plex or a 300-unit development, they can't have more than 2 detached ADUs if they are proposed. AB 2533 the staff added language to section 19.1.12.050. This sets additional restrictions for city's review of ADU and JDU applications, including unpermitted ADUs and JDUs, particularly those constructed prior to January 1, 2020. The city cannot require correction of non-conforming zoning violations in conjunction with an approval of permit, and cannot require correction of building standard violations or unpermitted structures which are not a threat to public health and safety. So as it relates to occupancy and government code section references, staff updated section 19.1.12.020 to reflect government code section 66328. ADUs may not receive final occupancy before primary unit receives occupancy. Government code sections, a little too far. March 25th, 2024, after the ordinance was adopted and the city had submitted its ordinance for review by the state, the government code sections were updated, which means that whatever government code sections that the city was referencing throughout its various chapters that discuss ADUs or regulate ADUs were out of date. So this was simply an exercise of updating the government code sections, particularly 1908, which is our definition section, and 1912, which is our ADU section or chapter. As it relates to multifamily ADUs, one clarification the state was adamant about was that duplexes are considered multifamily uses, particularly any use on a single lot that has 2 units and more is considered a multifamily use. Therefore, the duplexes, as was ordained in our prior ordinance under the single family zone, had to be removed. And therefore, duplexes are subject to the multifamily, the streamlined multifamily standards. Further, that same streamlined table that governs multifamily ADUs, the state is requiring the city to remove the maximum size for detached units of 1,200 square feet, as there's no maximum size for detached ADU for multifamily developments as it relates to state law. Non-streamlined ADUs, those are typically ADUs on single-family lots that are over 800 square feet. Parking, we updated language to allow for when an application for an ADU is submitted in conjunction with a new single-family home. The city may not require parking for ADU if site or ADU satisfies other criteria listed in that section, which a couple of those include that no on-street parking is available, or that they're within a certain radius, typically a half mile within a high transit corridor. Structure design, HCD took issue with the ambiguity of the non-streamlined language to require or strongly encourage new non-streamlined ADUs on single-family lots to be consistent in design with the principal dwelling unit. Language, even on non-streamlined ADUs, must be objective in nature. Therefore, the staff had added language that the ADUs must match the principal dwelling unit when it comes to materials, roofing, and included as well, particularly certain areas of town which the state does have certain design standards, such as the Eichler development area, the Eichler zoning zoned areas, as well as residential hillside areas. Those non-streamlined ADUs must adhere to those design standards. I call these errata slides. Most of these are in response to community input in the last few days, as well as staff looking back into the ordinance and finding better language between Thursday, when this item was posted, and today. The first one is there was staff had missed this one reference to duplex lots within the within the streamlined single family zone. So this part of the oh gosh, my finger not. Maybe it's not working. Typically, I can use my finger to circle. I can't do that. So if you look at this slide, you see the red lettering struck out on this section. This is the new strikeout under that row under table 19-112-030A. Further, there's a couple things. We strengthen the language of how the detached units shall match the exterior roofing materials, window style, exterior lighting, exterior colors of the principal dwelling unit. And further, if you look at the last bullet under B, subsection B of this table, one zoning district was left out originally when the agenda was published. So in response to a community input, staff agreed to add the R1A, which is the single-family residential district with semi-rural characteristics. This is a zone that's typically behind Apple campus on Infinite Loop. And I believe this is the last errata, is that the heights for ADUs within that are listed in 112-030A and 030B, which are the two streamlined sections. The state requires local jurisdictions to grant additional 2 feet in height for ADUs within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop or a high-quality transit corridor to match the pitch of the existing primary, if it matches the pitch of the existing primary dwelling unit. And staff will make those changes to those tables between now and the City Council meeting in September. The recommended action that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution, recommending that the City Council adopt an ordinance to 1, find the proposed actions are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and CEQA guidelines, and 2, amend the following chapters: 1908 definitions and 19-112 accessory dwelling units. The next step is the recommendations made by the Planning Commission will be forwarded to the City Council for consideration at their September 3rd, 2025 meeting. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. I'm curious if our neighboring cities that have an AD ordinance are getting the same letter from HCDA, and whether they're having to, again, a similar question as what I asked previously on the prior agenda item, are they having to, every time there's a state law change, go through this update process, or is there a way to just have some boilerplate language that says state law may proceed, local ordinance, and avoid these updates?
So I'll answer the first part of your question. I think every jurisdiction that turns something in gets a letter from HCD. That's from my experience. I think we got off pretty easy compared to some other cities that have multiple pages of responses. I think the most frustrating thing for local jurisdictions is the amount of time it takes for HCD to get comments back to our jurisdiction. I mean, you saw that it took almost a year and a half to get questions back, and even in the meantime, further assembly bills and state bills were adopted and took effect while we had this ordinance without having any feedback from the state. And that's very typical of HCD. I mean, they have limited staff on their end as well, and to review every single jurisdiction that submits an ordinance. In terms of, I haven't gone through in detail neighboring jurisdictions, their letters, so I can't really say with certainty if those comments they received back recently are similar to ours. But I know that it's more more often than not typical to get some type of feedback from the state. And in my opinion, I think we actually got a pretty good review as well. In terms of having language that's very simple that says we will follow state law, I don't know. I haven't seen that done. However, we do have some standards within our ADU ordinance that go above and beyond state law. The Planning Commission recommended certain allowances that go above and beyond state law, as well as City Council adding further allowances, which includes multiple, up to 3 units on 3 ADUs on a single family lot, as well as the same even for non-streamlined ADUs, as well, as long as they can meet the law coverage and FAR. And those are things that go above and beyond what the state requires.
And if I may go back to the errata that you were showing, the language seemed to change from compatible with to shall exactly match. Are you able to put up that slide again? And I'm curious what drove the change in language, because some of this exactly match may be hard to achieve if the original construction was back in the 70s or 80s, and you're having an ADU added now. How do you exactly match what was built back in the 70s?
And that's a great point. And that's within the Planning Commission to say them, is this too restrictive or not? Is someone's house, if I'm being too frank, too ugly? You don't want to repeat that design with the ADU. But this is in a way, again, this only applies to ADUs, detached ADUs that are above 800 square feet or not.
Yeah, I guess my question
Sure.
to start with is just a clarifying question in terms of the language that is used. Is there a technical difference between the term shall be compatible with to shall match?
HCD's viewpoint is that the language has to be objective. Like, somebody needs to read it and know what they have to do. When you say shall be compatible, now what you think is compatible may not be what the applicant thinks is compatible, and HCD doesn't want, and the law doesn't allow us to have any language that has that leeway. The Planning Commission could say this is too restrictive. The Planning Commission could say you have to do 2 of the 4 things here, whatever it is, but you have to have very clear guidelines on what that is. And again, this is a very small subset of the ADUs that people build, because this shall only apply to ADUs that are greater than 800 square feet. And most people try to avoid doing that because you have to pay connection fees and parkland dedication fees and other things if you build an ADU greater than 800 square feet. But with that said, that is up to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, my personal input is that I believe that we need to be tolerant that the community has homes that were built largely in the 80s, tracts that developed back in the 80s and 70s, and you're not going to get exact match to materials. And I think compatible gives us enough space to operate, but I don't know that we get exact matches. And I would like to allow for our residents to not be excessively burdened by this due to the need for objective language. I don't think everything can be absolutely objective here.
So with that said, then this language shall be struck altogether. We can't have the language that said shall be compatible.
Are we saying that all language in the ordinance needs to be objective or needs to be struck?
Well, I think my understanding for HCD is that, and again, feel free to jump in, is that, any language, regardless if it's streamlined or not, shall be objective as much as possible. So if the Planning Commission feels that this language under, subsection A is not objective, it's too restrictive and too set for interpretation, differing interpretation by staff, then it's within your right to strike it altogether or come up with different language.
Yeah, just to add, John and Pew are both correct. If it's not objective, like saying compatible, it's too open-ended. Saying you need to match the materials. So if you have a stucco siding, you'd have stucco siding. You have wood siding, you'd have wood siding. And the color compatibility, that's something that's getting more objective. That still has some wiggle room, in my opinion, but saying just compatible isn't going to be enforceable at all.
So just a practical question on how you deal with these applications. If you're getting an ADU application with windows and exterior lighting that cannot match a 1970s window fixture and lighting fixture, how would staff deal with that?
I think from a practical perspective, it'll close enough, you're close enough. Right now, we don't actually apply this section at all. I mean, it's not as though we go out and say, I'm sorry, your ADU is not compatible with your main home. And HCD is saying the same thing, essentially. You cannot have this language. In fact, HCD is saying you have to remove this language because you cannot have subjective language. So either we don't have anything under sub bullet point A, or we have something, but that needs to be objective.
Yeah, I would be in favor of removing it rather than trying to become too objective, because just practically speaking, there's no way to match these fixtures from 40, 50 years ago.
I agree, because, well, for one, I'm not sure that shall match is an objective standard. I mean, we're really splitting hairs on this one, like, and it's a very, very thin hair that we're splitting. So I'm kind of like, I'm not sure that HCD will accept that as, I mean, I can't speak for HCD, but I mean, it seems problematic. And rather than trying to come up with more and more and more restrictive language to try and fit the intent of being an objective standard, I would be in favor of just removing this sub-bullet entirely.
And maybe just to clarify that a bit more, just to tease it apart, I think perhaps colors and roofing materials might survive a 40-year vintage, or does that not? I see Commissioner Scharf shaking his head.
No, I mean, we still have houses in my neighborhood with a wood shake roof. You would never put in a wood shake roof anywhere now, but this would say, oh, you have to have a wood shake roof on the ADU. Is that even legal now? Can you still put in a shake roof? I think not.
No, it would just have to make it look like it, but doesn't have to.
Yeah, so, yeah, just, I would just strike this. It's just, and I think shall does mean must, doesn't it? Yeah, so it's not really unclear. Yeah, match.
It's still open to some interpretation.
Yeah, match
clearly.
is kind of
I think
subjective.
materials you could clear, but you're right. The goal isn't to make somebody with a 50-year-old house paint their house to match the ADU, because that's newer. So I can answer, HCD would be happy if we didn't have it at all.
Yeah. I mean, I can see if someone's putting an ADU in the front of their house where everyone's, and they could do that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm fine with just striking it as well.
Yeah, I think your consensus here that you're hearing is this can be struck. Yeah. Other clarifying questions? If none, we will take public comment first, if we have public comments.
We have one speaker in person, Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Yes, HCD doesn't really give a hang about what happens to Cupertino. I think they're petty and capricious. And if they sent us a letter about ADUs, they would just want us to be like San Diego, where you can have 20 ADUs per single family lot. And that it was so bad in San Diego that they had to get on the Mayor Gloria's case and back it out. They had a hotel that was composed of ADUs. I'm sorry if I sound so bitter about this, but I am absolutely appalled that Nancy Skinner was the author of SB 1211. She was just parked on the Federal Energy Commission in January. Ash Kalra was a author of 2533, and Juan Carrillo, who is the head of the Assembly local governance, which is where 79 is going on the 16th. ADUs are funded by the venture capital companies. That's why the laws change so fast. God bless our planning group, the city, everyone, because we have been, it's like hamsters on a treadmill. You should not have bills being popped out like this every 6 months that the city can't even keep up with it. It is irresponsible, and it shows all they want is money. There is a giant ADU that was parked in the front yard of a house in Los Altos under the canopy of 2 85-year-old oak trees. I've watched this. The 2 oak trees died. They put it under the canopy. They are dead. I used to play under those trees when I was a child with friends. Okay, so now there's a giant ADU parked out in the front of the road. It looks horrible. I'm saying that we can put ADUs in, junior ADUs, but we have to be responsible. HCD is not responsible. They don't have enough staffing. They're capricious. They play games. They abuse the names of good cities like mountain lions and everything. I've had 5 years of HCD. They're completely incompetent. But we should not have these bills coming out every 6 months. It's stupid. And it's a waste of time. And frankly, I am tired of having to waste my valuable time keeping up with them. Yes, we need to have architectural compatibility, because one of those monsters can ruin the property values of adjacent properties. And what the heck is a JADU? Like a garbage can?
Thank you, Jennifer. That is your time. We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. At this time, we will close public comment for this agenda item and bring it back to Commission for discussions. I did have a question on the change from short-term rental to a rental less than 30 days. So what was the rationale and what is the difference? Again, is this going back to the objective language?
I'm not. Did we make the change?
Yes.
I believe that was based on a recommendation from our attorney's office, because the short-term rental wasn't defined in the code, so they basically said it is for rental not for less than 30 days. So essentially, it's still the same, just saying it a little differently.
And I'm curious, is 30 days chosen based on some particular criteria? Why 30
State
as
law.
a...
That's based in state law.
Can you expand on that?
So
Or maybe
transient housing is 30 days or under. So once you go above 30 days, you become a resident, and then it becomes more. Certain rights are given to long-term renters instead of short-term rentals too. So, as an example, when we have our short-term rental ordinance, we don't. Well, actually, state law doesn't permit any ADUs to be used as short-term rental, like Airbnb or whatnot. So, because that conflicts with the intent of ADUs is to be,
So the spirit of this comment change or the text change is that the JADU shall not be used as transient housing. Is that right?
For Airbnbs and other such use.
And thank you. And so is the definition then 30 days or 31 days based on what you said? Sounds like 30 days.
Not less than 30 days. So it has to be 30 or more. So it's basically 29 days or fewer is considered transient.
Okay, because I thought I heard 30. So it's either less than equal to or it's less than 31 if it's 30.
I believe it's less than 30. And again, this isn't a new standard. It's just a clarifying standard.
Okay. All right. Other commissioners, if you have comments, please jump in.
Yeah, I have a question, comment. I think I have personally received a decent amount of feedback around the 4-foot setback, and particularly it being done with sort of ADUs not being built for the intended use, which is to add new housing stock, but more of actually as a housing extension where the attached ADU is built so close to the home and then a door is punched through. And, I spoke with Pew about this, but I am wondering, is there anything that can be done from a code standpoint that can ensure that attached ADUs are built for the purpose of new housing and not an extension, or perhaps, we encourage detached ADUs more and we actually put more stringent regulations on setbacks for attached ADUs to encourage, I don't know if that's possible.
It would be a code violation in most cases when we have we have a 45% floor area ratio limit, and many of those new single family homes that come in have the 45% for their primary, and then add the extra 5% for their ADU. In a sense, if you punch that, as you say, as you punch that door through there, you're essentially now a non-conforming, a non-compliant structure. So that's very much subject to a code enforcement case. Unfortunately, we're a reactive, city when it comes to code enforcement, and it's hard to tell whether someone's actually punching that hole or not unless there is a complaint coming through. In terms of encouraging more detached ADUs rather than attached ADUs, I mean, that's up to the Planning Commission, City Council, if there's ways to allow for further detached ADUs above what state law, the minimum that state law has. For example, we allow for someone who wants to do 3 streamlined ADUs can do 3 detached streamlined ADUs in their backyard. So, for example, they want to put 400 square foot ADUs in their backyard that's detached. They can do it as long as they meet the side and rear setbacks and the setbacks between structures and whatever other building code standards that they can do that as well. But if the Planning Commission has any other suggestions, as well as to recommend to City Council, we're more than happy to consider those.
Can we require more than a 4-foot setback for attached ADUs? That's not.
That we cannot do, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'd like to go back to the question around the red line draft language. There's a change from no size limit from 1,200 square feet max to no size limit. Can you expand on that a bit?
The letter from the HCD, which was attached, was pretty clear on that, as well as if you look at the government code section, there really is no maximum size stated within state law, unfortunately. So if somewhere on multifamily, they could build something that's 1,500 square feet that's detached if they have a multifamily lot. If what's that? Or well, I don't want to say. Oh yes, or 3,000 if they wanted, but unfortunately,
Okay, Mr. Scharf, do you have a question?
So it seems like existing ADUs can still be rented out as short-term rentals from looking at the state law. Only if it was built after a certain date can it not be used as a short-term rental.
Great question. This is existing ADUs. The standard for ADUs not being allowed to be used for less than 30 days, I believe, goes for all accessory dwelling units. Possibly prior.
If I may, I think you are correct. The ADU law does state that ADUs built, I think it was after January 1st, 2020 or 2016, one of the two or 2018, cannot be rented out for a short-term rental, and then before that could be. But the city council at that time had taken the stance that they did not want to encourage short-term rentals in ADUs at all, in the interest of encouraging
right. The city can be more restrictive.
Correct. So
than
for
the
that,
state.
the city is more restrictive.
Yeah. Okay. But the owner can live in the ADU and rent out the primary, correct? Okay. And you could technically have a ADU that's larger than your primary residence. You could build. There's small houses. 800 square foot house, and you could put in a 1,200 square foot ADU and say,
in theory, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then again, I think I know we are kind of splitting hairs here, but are there any possibilities of local overrides on some of these? Is there any conditions under which local overrides, for example, to the height or the maximum lot size, the maximum AD size?
The cities can be more lenient,
okay,
but not more restrictive.
Now, can you remind me again, what is the state policy applies as far as half a mile within transit? They have and is our policy the same, or is it different in terms of half mile versus? I thought we had some places where I think we were more lenient than what the state allowed. I'm looking at this.
I do believe you're correct about. I'll have to look at it, but I think yes, from my recollection, we were a little more lenient in terms of the height being allowed and And even without
Are we
being
able to
within-
pull that up? I apologize
I
for
think-
putting people on the spot here.
Let me confirm with
Yeah, I could be guessing. I think it was 16 feet, and then you could have an additional 2 to 18. But this is a year ago, and I think we went with the 18 universally.
So that no longer matters because state law defines this as what, 25 now?
And that may have changed if it, yeah, I think you could go 18 to 20 is the way this is proposed now. But I want to say when we last took this ordinance, 16 applied universally, 18 was if you were within the 500 feet of transit.
Right. Yeah,
and we
that's
went with 18 citywide.
right. And that's why I'm hoping we avoid these overrides and just let the state law be the case where no overrides are possible. That way we reduce revisiting this every time.
So I will say that our ADU policy related to, the fact that we allow additional ADUs in single-family homes is kind of built into the housing element. So we can't go back on that. So we already have one override that we can't roll back.
Have we asked HCD that question?
It would mean opening up our housing element.
Asking a question would mean opening up
No,
the
I mean,
housing
if we were to change it, it would mean we'd have to open up the housing element to make that amendment to the housing element.
Well, so my question is, have we asked HCD explicitly?
No, it
if-
was not something that came to mind.
So can we take that action to ask HCD whether the city policy differing from the state policy can be changed so that we have fewer updates that we need to make to these ordinances? Ideally, if we did not have these, we'd just follow the state law, right? And we'll go with whatever the state has us doing.
Correct. You have no option
Right.
Yeah.
to follow state law. But yeah, I don't know if we asked the question as in terms of height of ADUs, if we just wanted to be compliant with state law rather than more lenient. I think that's the question we would be asking.
Yeah, I'm
HCD.
going to rephrase my question to say where we no longer have local override capability, can we strike the differences out? Can we strike out these clauses out of our AD ordinance so we no longer need to keep track of all these state law changes?
Yeah, I think the issue could be what Pew raised, though, is if it affects our housing element and we have to then change something in the housing element, that becomes the issue. Where the ordinance is reflected in the housing element. And
So-
I'd have to look at the exact housing element language on that.
So HCD would say, hey, your leniency would result in more ADUs, more units, so you can't change it because that would mean you're building potentially less
Correct.
housing units, even though it probably is.
They
Nothing to
could,
do
and
with
I don't know if it
Yeah.
would make any impact at all in the real
Right.
world, but they could say that.
Yeah, and again, to clarify, the motivation for my comment is to just reduce this unnecessary draft revisions just to keep up with all these state laws. If we can not state something and defer to the state law, that would be ideal to avoid these. I mean, this is a non-trivial amount of work. If I look at the red line draft and you're tracking all these changes, it's not fulfilling work for whoever is having to do it.
if I can add something too, as someone who's dealt with trying to read state law and interpret it, it takes, I think, a law degree, and this is a compliment to Michael and his team as well. Trying to help staff come with this too. We also want the zoning ordinance to be user friendly as possible. So much of what we write here is for the community to ease of reference and whatnot, that I can hand them a handout if they look, or they can go online and have that, those state laws as in an easy usable table and figure it out. I mean, state laws are extremely complicated, and I misread them all the time, and and I hate to admit that, but it takes a village to come up with these ordinances, unfortunately. So so that's why and that's another reason why very few times you see something that's so simple, just follow state law, as a municipal code chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be worth looking into asking HCD, hey, can we just follow state law on ADUs and not have all these changes, and will that decertify our housing element?
maybe asking the same question differently. Not every city has an AD ordinance, right? There are cities without an AD ordinance. So how are we better
I don't
off
think so.
than cities without an AD ordinance?
You have to have an ADU ordinance. I mean, how it's ordained by that local jurisdiction. It's different from city to city, but each jurisdiction has to have something within the municipal code that discusses ADUs. Now, how they write it and how HCD reviews it, I don't know. I can't speak for HCD, but.
Okay, other questions or feedback?
So how many ADUs that are not part of new construction are actually being permitted these days? Or is every one that wanted one already done? I mean, if I was building a new house, I would put in an ADU as part of the construction.
Correct.
But to build an ADU as part of your existing house, it's so expensive that I would just wonder how many,
It gets done. Yeah.
are we
quite a
worrying
few.
about something
Yeah.
that's not happening very much?
No, we have quite a few. Unfortunately, I don't have an exact number. I think we're averaging 30 to 40 ADUs a year now.
Yeah, it's about 40.
About 40. Yeah, I mean
And those are on existing homes or
Both.
on new homes?
both. What we don't see a lot of
50-50,
is
okay.
JDUs.
Yeah.
We maybe have one every other year, or one a year. Yeah. So. Are they mostly attached or detached? Both. I would say both. Very few internal conversions. I would say we have them, but very few. What we see a lot of too is prefabricated ADUs coming in. If you see a big crane hanging over
Yeah.
someone's house, that's pretty much a prefab ADU going in. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to go back to the errata that we reviewed earlier on structure design, also in the red line draft. I missed the B part of it. So you have new text, and if you want to share that, you have new text that says shall meet the design standards when in one of the following zoning districts, and you've called out 4. Can you clarify the rationale for why we have these 4 here and what exactly is going on?
Sure, and many plan developments, and not all plan developments, but many plan developments have certain design guidelines. So, for example, if we look at Oak Valley in the western part of town by the cemetery and San Antonio Park, there are certain designs that they have to meet with each home that was built and whatnot. So, those are specific. R1E, the Eichler zones, those are very specific. Those are very objective. If you look at our R1E ordinance 19.28, there are some, in terms of roof pitch as an example, as being one of the very much objective standards. Monte Vista design guidelines, not a lot of residential neighborhoods within that area, but there's still a few. And those are like the Queen Anne or Victorian style homes that you see, if you go by off Imperial, that part of town.
So I can understand the Eichler and Monte Vista design guidelines being as stringent as identified. Why plan development and RHS?
So, if I may, in the Oak Valley district that John was just talking about, there actually are design guidelines that are built into the use permit and the actual development. And so it's making sure that those are the very large lots where you would see the larger ADUs. They have the FAR to kind of build those larger ADUs. And they do have some standards that basically says X number of the lots have to be a certain style, Y number of the lots have to be a certain style. in
Sorry,
each
just
neighborhood.
trying to correlate your response to my comment. Is that a planned development?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So basically what you're saying is where there are standards in place for planned developments, we would like to
Exactly.
adhere to that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to residential hillside, why would we, RHS seems to have enough character and variety that would not be the case.
Some objective standards has to do with the paint color, as an example, which is also a way to lower the impact of visibility from the valley floor onto the hillside.
And so this text did not exist previously. So what was the rationale for not having this in the first place, or is this just state law now requiring us to add this, or I'm trying to...
State law always requires some type of objective standard. I believe it wasn't the purview of the city council to add these specific areas. And so it was not until HCD really looked at our ordinance and said, this is too subjective, be more objective. And, occasionally we do hear some rumblings and concerns about, particularly in the Eichler areas, those are very, very special design standards and almost historic in a sense. And so maintaining those, even on all structures on site, would be, we think is important.
Yeah, I understand the first three. I'd like to strike the RHS because I think bullet A is sufficiently is sufficient for RHS. I don't see why you have RHS clubbed in with Eichler and plan development and Monte Vista design guidelines.
Yeah,
I'd like to strike
so
RHS.
hillside zones aren't planned developments. So I think those are two distinct zoning districts. RHS is very, very specific and doesn't necessarily, if you build a home in an RHS zoned area, it's not planned development.
That's what I'm saying. So I'd like to strike RHS from this and not have.
Chair, you just said that if we had A, you wouldn't need RHS, but your proposal, I thought, was to strike all of A.
The proposal was to strike all of A and further to strike RHS as well, because RHS is not in the same category as Eichler or Monte Vista guidelines or plan development.
That is again the Planning Commission's choice.
Okay. That would be my proposal, to not overly burden RHS homes, and RHS is not necessarily the same as the other three categories. I'd like to strike RHS.
Well, I think it depends on what is in the RHS standards, because if it's like, paint color to make sure it blends into the hills, I can see how that would make sense. That, I don't want to look up at the hills and see, a bright pink home sticking out like a pimple. I'm making that up, but you get the point. So I think those standards are there for a reason, so it makes sense and they are different from, homes on the valley floor for a reason, because they're up on the hill. So it makes sense to extend that to the ADUs.
And we have a explicit RHS design standard?
Yes, there are objective standards within the RHS ordinance, 1948.
Okay. So to an extent, this is no different than a remodel of an RHS, is that right? A remodel of an RHS would have to comply likewise. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Well, I was just going to ask, to follow up on the vice chair, is there anything we can do to incentivize detached ADUs versus attached ADUs? As I was looking through the standards, I don't see a whole lot different except the height standard, that we're allowed to go higher on an attached ADU, but I don't know that would really make any difference to entice people. So any thoughts on that?
I guess when the only row I could think of in the streamlined section of the table for single family development is to only allow multiple detached ADUs on the site rather than a hybrid of the various types. So rather than, I wouldn't say that's an incentive, but rather it's just you're taking away a choice, But again, how you want to frame it is up to you. So the commission, not up to me, and as well as city council. So.
Yeah, my general sense of this is we want to not be in the business of deviating from these state laws. They're changing often enough. We're never going to be able to override these things, and we're just creating work for ourselves in trying to create these one-offs that don't last the test of time. So, if there's no other
Shall I
comments,
make a motion?
I would like to make yeah, please.
Okay. Let's see, where is it? Oh, hold on. Let me find the...
Or I can go ahead if you'd like.
Go for it.
So I move the staff recommendation with one change, which is structure design, section I, clause A, be struck.
I second that.
Did we get that right? Was there anything else that we changed? That was the only
Just to confirm for the record, that's table 19-112, 040, subsection I, clause A.
Yep.
Be struck.
Did we have any other changes to make? Okay. If none, then let us vote.
The motion carries with Commissioner Fung absent.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. I think I lost my copy. I'm glad we have one more here. But with that, I think we are done with agenda item 3. I want to thank John for your time and all the effort that went into this. I want to thank staff, Luke and Piyu. And then with that, we move on. There's no old business or new business, so we move on to staff reports. Are there any staff reports?
I wanted to let the commission and the public know that we did receive a couple of new housing development projects. So those are on the city's major projects webpage. I believe there's a townhome development on South De Anza for about 103 townhomes, and another townhome development. I'd have to look it up.
Where was the first one?
The first one is at 1601 South De Anza, which is where the sheriff's office is.
Ah, okay.
It's that building and the parking lots adjacent to it, adjacent to the coach house.
Oh, so it's not the coach house development?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's next to the coach house development that we already approved?
Yes.
Which is not built.
Just
Okay.
north or south of that?
It's north of it.
So it is the sheriff's building?
It is the sheriff's
Okay.
building.
Oh,
yes.
it's the sheriff's building?
Correct.
Okay.
And
103 units, you said?
thereabouts.
Townhomes?
Yes.
Okay.
Of
That's a
course.
good location.
And I'm just going to pull up the website. It just flew right out of my mind.
Do you recall who the
It's the
applicant
old
was?
Cupertino Bike Shop location, right? The
No.
second one? It's the Cupertino Bike Shop
Canyon
location
Crossing,
on
that
Foothill?
could very well be.
Yes,
I'm just gonna
sorry,
look it
just
up.
staying on the first one. Do you recall the applicant?
No.
Oh, so the other one is
Actually, it is the
Canyon
current
Crossing?
property owner. I think it's Dollinger. That's the current property owner.
Sorry, and then going to the second one, which is, you're right, I believe.
It's where the Cupertino Bike Shop is.
So that's Canyon Crossing, which was approved ages ago. Okay.
But they changed it. It's
Well,
more dense now.
Okay, okay. But it's all townhouses now?
Yes.
Okay. And no retail. Okay.
That is an SB 330. We got two SB 330 preliminary applications, is what I should say.
And it's all townhouses again?
It's all townhouses,
Okay,
yes.
yep.
Are there any designs that are shareable with the community at this point?
Not at this point because they're not applications at this point.
Okay, thank you.
And any other staff reports?
None.
Okay, so any commission reports? I know, Commissioner Schaaf, you were the designated commissioner attending the Housing Commission. Have you got any reports from there?
No, I have not attended any
Okay.
of this.
Is that something that we historically have reported on? Or I'm not really sure.
No.
Okay.
If I may, Chair, I do have one more update.
Yeah,
The
please.
Wolf Road Housing Project has come in as a formal application. This is the one just north of the former Valco development.
Which one?
The Wolf Road Housing,
Okay.
the teacher housing, the county
Oh,
project.
okay. So that came in and that is rental apartments, correct?
There are some townhomes. I think this is educator housing, and then there is another component to it. So it does have some townhomes.
And this is their phase 1, as they called it?
It's the application is for the whole phase.
For the whole thing,
It's
okay.
about
So-
240 units, 250 units.
And this is all affordable?
Correct.
And who is the applicant?
It is Eden Housing.
Okay, so it's a nonprofit.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's
in-
100% affordable.
They are proposing it to be about 20% at this point, but my understanding is eventually it would be 100% affordable, but we aren't sure.
Okay, any other commission reports? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to future agenda setting. Any future agenda items from commissioners? Any future agenda items from staff?
I would
Okay.
like to see a study session on Article 34 of the California Constitution,
Okay,
because this has been
noted.
coming up recently. Yeah, I don't want to go into why, but it has been coming up just recently.
Noted.
And it
I
would
think
be
we
good
should
to
just note
know-
down the agenda item and not need to discuss that.
Right, we won't
further.
discuss it. Just, I would like, our legal department to give us a presentation on that.
Okay.
I would agree.
Okay, very good. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.